And can we go back to the truck drivers? So when you say you don't think that there would be like the job would adapt, so it's pretty likely that in 10 years, for example, there would be automated trucks that drive better than truck.
Yeah, but let me tell you something. So it's a long story, but I went to Washington. I met with the French ambassador, and he told me, "Oh, that's very worrying, the situation of truck drivers, because there are 5 million truck drivers in the U.S. So if they lose their job tomorrow because of autonomous vehicles, then what will they do? Right? They'll be unemployed." So I went to the Truck Drivers Association, which was a few blocks away, because everything is 1 square mile in Washington, which is very convenient. And I just knocked on the door unannounced. And so I was welcomed by the chief policy executive of the Truck Driving Association. And we had a conversation for 1 hour. And I asked him, "Are you worried about the end of work, right, in your profession?" And he was not at all. And as always, when you get into the detail, into the specifics of a given profession, you see how more complicated things are. First of all, you already have automated system for trucks, like for instance, but not fully automated, but for instance, to stay in your lane, or platooning, to follow one truck and so on. And they are only adopted by 15% of the trucks, meaning that the adoption curve of those technologies is still very slow and gives you years, if not decades, to adapt. But then let's imagine that we really have a fully autonomous truck. It will start with the interstate, right? When there is just a straight road and you just have to follow your lane. But then you will need one pilot to take the truck from the starting point of the journey to the interstate. Yeah. And we need one other pilot to take it from the interstate to the arrival point. And then you will need probably somebody when the truck goes through areas with students or schools or complicated cities, you will need somebody to supervise. And then you will need somebody on top of it to make sure that the process is smooth all through. So in fact, you're creating 4 jobs. So there are different jobs, but you see that you are reinventing a profession. But you still need that human work, because you still need that common sense, because you are still in a very complicated environment where the machine just cannot technically take into account every possible situation. So and also you grow a market. When in planes there used to be 3 pilots. With the progress of techniques, we only needed 2 pilots, so 1 down. And guess what? The number of pilots has increased, because the market of airplanes and aviation has boomed. Yeah. Right? And the fact that there were less pilots allowed that market to actually swell. So it's the same with truck. With autonomous clean trucks, we will need more. We may have more and more trucks on the road, and so thus creating more and more jobs. So.
Yeah, I think Harari gives a good example too. It's about the unmanned drones that actually require more people than...
Right, yeah.
And they're struggling to staff them.
And even the aviation regulator in the US, for instance, they required to de-automatize a number of functions in the planes, because the pilots were losing their brains and were losing their capacity to react.
Okay.
Because they were losing their sense of agency, basically. They were losing the idea that they were actually responsible for something in the cockpit. So it's also interesting that this automation, even when it's technically possible, sometimes it's dangerous, because it makes people lose their decision-making capacity. And so the regulator has to make sure that you preserve some human function, even though it could technically be done by a machine.
But that would still be because the AI is not good enough. Maybe when you say that they couldn't do the job better than humans, because like Harari's point would be that there could be the risk though that it follows what happened in chess, which was that at first humans were better, then the combination of human with an AI was better, but in the end it was just a computer that was better.
Right, but there are more people playing chess now than before Deep Blue.
Yeah.
So it tells everything.
But on the performance side, you could need humans for emotional reasons, but on the risk, I think according to him, is that if you want performance, you rely more.
But chess is a very limited, very, very, very limited game. It's a game with a closed set of rules
in the future,
and a certain number of positions. So, and again, we come back to this idea of common sense. Right? In chess, you don't need a representation of the world to be good at chess. You need to understand what's happening in the room. You just need to understand the rules on the board.
It's a limited.
It's very limited. It's extremely limited.
You could see as a limited common sense.
And then there are, for instance, physicians who explain that in order to process all the information that happen in one cube meter, you would need more energy than the universe can produce. So we don't realize that the number of data we produce and we can crunch is actually very limited compared to a full representation of the world. So I don't see that. I mean, again, your topic was UBI, and I'm not so expert in AI and stuff. But my spontaneous reaction would be that.
Okay, but obviously it's related because it makes more sense, I guess, to get a universal.
But again, as I said, I think it's a wrong argument, and I think you can have an argument on basic income regardless of automation, regardless of the technique, as Spain was making 2 centuries ago, and that this argument is really fundamentally based on your conception of individual freedom and whether you want people to be able to be autonomous or not. If you mix that discussion with the problem of job automation, then you fall into that trap of, will AI displace all jobs, and people hold very, very different opinions, and you never get anywhere in terms of UBI. So if you ground it on something more fundamental, more philosophical, then the situation gets clearer in a way.
Yeah, then we don't depend on those speculations.
Exactly.